Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, the longest government shutdown in history drags into its fifth week. What are leaders doing to reach a compromise? How could this impact our state in the long run? Utah is weeks away from the start of the legislative session. What issues are leaders pushing? Which ballot initiatives could be on the chopping block? And what will citizen engagement look like on Capitol Hill?
Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Emily Clark, anchor for ABC4 News, Boyd Matheson, opinion editor for the Deseret News, and Lester Rojas, political reporter for Univision. So glad to have you all with us today. I want to jump into the government shutdown. We are now Day 27, the longest shutdown in the history of our country. And I want to start with a little bit about a local poll recently. Who's to blame? And it's not really what you might think. I want to give you this poll. Utah Policy put this out with Dan Jones. But I want to ask you this question first, Emily. 36% of Utahns blame the president, President Trump. 31% blame the Democrats. Interestingly, only 2% blame the Republicans in Congress.
I think it's interesting to look at the numbers, and since they're so close for the president and the Democrats, I think the bottom line is we don't care who we blame. We just want it to be reopened, and you can toss the blame around to whoever you want to, but at the end of the day, the federal government needs to open back up. We need the funding back. We need the services back. We need them to do their jobs. So whoever might be to blame, it doesn't matter. Get your job done.
I think a lot of people feel that way. Boyd, why are the Republicans in Congress being kind of spared on this one when it looks like it's the Trump presidency and the Democrats?
Yeah, I think because that's where all the attention is right now. All the attention is on Nancy Pelosi versus President Trump, so that's really kind of driving that, I think, as an overall marker. But really, the blame goes far beyond that. To me, the blame really is the leadership in the House and the Senate on both sides of the aisle. They're like a four-person law firm of, Pelosi, Schumer, McConnell, and McCarthy. And that's where the real blame is, because they could finish this thing and open the government in an afternoon. It's not that difficult.
Well, we need to explore that point for a second, because it looks like the targets are there with the president and the Democrats. But Lester, take up this point a little bit. Maybe McConnell, maybe the Senate Republicans have a moment to rise where it becomes more than just about those two groups.
I think it's sad to see that there's so much, as Boyd said, this can be done in like 15 minutes. However, the different thinking of, this is more about politics, or this is more about the people of the United States. So I think this is something that is something to be embarrassed about, because the people that are more affected are the people of U.S. So
I think that's a good point. Anyone at this point, anyone could rise up and say, let's compromise, let's figure something out. I love how you said in an afternoon. It could be done. What are they thinking is what I just keep wondering. We have things closed down, funding not there, and they continue to have their fighting in Washington.
That's right. And this is really a result of Congress not doing their job in the first place. The only reason we're in a shutdown is because Congress didn't pass a budget, and they didn't pass all the spending bills like they're supposed to. But I think the president could actually lead on this. And all he has to do is go stand. He doesn't even need to go to the House of Representatives for the State of the Union. He could stand on the steps of the Capitol and call out both sides to live up to the principles they profess. And he could say, okay, let's put DACA on the table. Let's put some border funding on the table and force them, force the Democrats. Are you really going to vote against DACA? Republicans, are you really going to vote against the border funding that you want? Force the conversation, and that conversation has to happen in front of the American people. We're abdicating and letting them do it in back rooms, and that's why there's no accountability.
I second what Boyd said, because this is something that we always hear in campaign mode. I'm the one that's able to reach across the aisle and get this done with my fellow Republicans and Democrats. This is not what we're looking at right now. So it is something that is time to negotiate. We know that President Trump is a negotiator. He said he's a negotiator. So it's a time he wants the wall. Democrats, perhaps Medicare, perhaps anything else. DACA is a good example that everyone has thought about.
Yeah, what's your sense of why that hasn't happened? Because it doesn't seem like the president has left a ton of room for that, right? He's got a line right now, the Democrats have. Why do you think, Lester, like exchanging Wall for taking care of the Dreamers, DACA finished finally, once and for all, which so many people, including Utahns, support.
80%, yeah.
80%, yeah, this is a universal issue people want to pass.
You know what? This comes down to a campaign promise. I think President Trump has been really solid in his position. He's a person that he's not really easy to deal with, or maybe let me reward that, to negotiate. He's someone that, you know, we've seen that he is his way or not. So this time is like where he put some plans before some bills that will give a pathway to Dreamers to do this. If Democrats don't take this, then we won't get that. So Democrats are asking for something else. But I guess it's a good time for both to compromise and get together and get this done.
Yeah, and they need to do it on the floor of the House and the Senate. Mitch McConnell's getting away scot-free on this thing, which is wrong. He is the biggest one to blame. He said, I'm not going to do anything in the Senate that the president will veto. That's not his job. I mean, you can go back to the old schoolhouse rock. You know, the House and the Senate pass something, and then the president will decide whether to sign it or not. And that's what should happen. And so we're really abdicating, you know, this whole process because it's politics first, last, and always. And that's never good for the American people.
The bottom line is the process is not happening.
That's
it's
right.
The process
Matters.
As American people, we deserve to watch the process being happening. They're taking away funding. We have children potentially going hungry in March if this shutdown continues.
Yeah.
They owe it to us to do their jobs in the process and to get this thing open.
I want to get to those impacts in just a moment, but maybe on that same point, I want to talk a bit about this op-ed that the governor wrote in Politico, and just a couple of words from him that I think are very interesting, and it comes in two parts as to where he thinks we might be able to get to the answer of this. And the first part for you, Emily, I want to read it. Tell me what your thoughts are. The governor says, I don't presume to suggest a way out of the current gridlock, but the increasingly frequent federal shutdown should tell us that the problem is deeper than a disagreement over immigration or health care or the debt ceiling. He goes on to say in this op-ed, the beauty of federalism is that it enables states to address the same problem in different ways.
What an opportunity for our governor, who's been so pro give the power back to the states, and an opportunity when our federal government is not looking very great. They look like a bunch of buffoons, you could say. He's arguing that the states could have more control. If the states had more control of SNAP funding, we wouldn't be asking our SNAP recipients to be budgeting their money correctly, because the money they're receiving now will be expiring in the middle of March. If the states had control, they can make sure that's not a problem. And so I think the governor, whether you agree with him or not, this is a wonderful opportunity for him to be stretching his muscles, showing us that state first could be the way to go.
Boyd, let's get this idea of federalism out for a second, because the governor quoted a conversation with Nancy Pelosi, and I've heard the governor say numerous times, states are the laboratories of democracy.
That's
all right,
right.
take that for a second and say, how do we apply that principle, and maybe we wouldn't have these kinds of issues in Washington.
Yeah, so the first thing is just having, when Congress does its job, then more and more of the power does get shifted back to the state, which is exactly what the governor is saying. I think the biggest challenge is that this is not even left and right. This is those in power against everyone else. And you have to realize that both the left and the right raise hundreds of millions of dollars every year off of shutdowns, immigration fights, health care as wedge issues. They run political campaigns off them, and they raise a lot of money. So this is a power thing. And as long as they can convince us that we're too divided to deal with immigration or border security or health care, it gives Congress the excuse to do nothing, and it gives the president of either political party the excuse to do what they want by executive order. And I think that's what the governor is calling out and saying, hey, if we do this the way the states function, have a real budget, live within the budget, do things down to the local level, everything changes, and that's the way it's designed to be.
Emily, let's take one of your threads about the impacts in the state, because they are significant.
Yes.
And I want to get to some of those, including the fact that not many people know that just in Ogden, in the state of Utah, more federal workers there than anywhere else in the West. I mean, a lot of federal workers impacted by this, but that's not all.
That's not all. But if we can start with Ogden, you have these IRS employees who are being asked to either work not paid or just stay home being furloughed. So that means restaurants near the building, no one's coming for lunch because nobody's working, so they're feeling the impact. You see these families feeling the impact, and then these furloughed workers who have a job, they know they're being paid, are having to go to local food banks asking for help, which to me is so sad, because this is a man or a woman or a family who doesn't have to ask for help, but they are being forced to ask for help because they can't work. So that's one impact. But the bigger impact are the people who receive SNAP benefits. That runs out of federal funding. So they've been asked to take the money they get this check, make sure it'll last till March 15th. And then after that, we don't know where we're going to go. Now think of the little kids who are in elementary schools across our state who have lunch assistance programs. So they're being helped to be fed by the federal government. They're good till the end of January. They don't know about February, some school districts. So because of the actions of our leaders in Washington, kids in Utah could go hungry. And that, to me, when you sit down and get to the basics of it, that's just wrong.
Wow, that's a pretty good list, Boyd, of impacts. I mean, you have to kind of wonder about the line in the sand that's been drawn, or how long they can keep those with these kind of impacts stacking on top of each other.
Yeah, that's right. And Emily brings up such a great point. I was in Washington last week, and while we tend to talk about the federal workers and the impact of the 800,000 or so that aren't getting their paychecks, it was fascinating in Washington, the cab drivers, and they're not going to get back pay. The restaurant workers, the people who work in the hotels, they're not going to get back pay when this is all over. The federal workers will be taken care of in the end.
Eventually. But you know, bills don't come eventually. Bills come every month.
That's right. But the small business owners, the entrepreneurs, the cab drivers, those folks are going to be hurt, and it's going to be sustained for a long time.
I would like to add that not only that people are not getting paid, but also another aspect from this shutdown is like the immigration courts are not functioning right now.
Good point.
So we have a really on the station on Univision, we have a really close relationship with lawyers, immigration lawyers. They have stock of cases that are not being heard right now, and in the only 10 circuit court in California, there is like thousands. Each judge has, thousands of cases that are not being looked at because of the government shutdown. So not only that aspect, but the people that are waiting in line to get the immigration court, paper going in a process, they are just being held hostage as everyone else.
That's a great point. Now, just one more point on this, though. Even our federal parks, right, are having an issue. We understand from the governor's office, they've allocated a certain amount of money for that, about $88,000. They're almost there, Emily, so even that's an impact, maybe, to your point.
That is an impact, but luckily they're going to outside groups who are raising money to keep the parks open. So it's going to happen. It's luckily happening in January. Resigns, for instance, not super busy in January, but February will come, and then March, and then April, and you might not have a plan past then if this, heaven forbid, the shutdown continues that long.
Okay, let's turn to some local issues. Our legislature is about to meet on the 28th of January, and we're already starting to talk about what happened with the propositions, right? The state voted on a couple of these, but I want to get into a couple of them in particular. Let's start talking about Medicaid expansion, Proposition 3. So it was passed, a sales tax increase to pay for the expansion of Medicaid. Now, Boyd, our legislature is already worried, though. We can't afford to pay for it. This is the argument, right, coming from them. Talk about what the ramifications are of that and what their process is.
So I think it's an interesting challenge because you had, I'm not a fan of governing by proposition. It's always the least effective because there's not real chance for compromise, for amendments, and for things to shift. So it always creates challenges because you have an all or nothing vote. But now you've got the legislature willing to jump in on the back end of this. And so that raises the question, when should they jump in? Now, Prop 2 was different in that you had both sides come together beforehand.
And people voted for Prop 2 knowing that there was going to be a change to it.
Yeah, that's right. But with Proposition 3 and 4, with Medicaid in particular, you don't have any compromise like that. So then the question becomes, when, after the people have spoken, when should the legislature step back in? And I think we're going to have a very long and very interesting conversation this legislative session about Medicaid funding.
Well, so it already came up in terms of bill. There's talk for at least a day from our legislature. We're going to repeal it, or repeal and replace. We actually heard that language on this, and then Senator Christensen changed his mind, so we're not going to do it that way. But Lester, talk about the implications of that, because the legislature is saying, even with that tax increase, we are $45 million short of what the cost will be over time.
I guess I'm a little bit with Rep. Christensen because where the money is going to come from. This is something that we need to look at. Even though we have a surplus in the budget at 1.9 billion, I guess there's he put an example. It has to come from the education fund. I don't know if that's fair. I don't know if that's something that the legislature has to look at to see what money can allocate to cover this. I mean, now that it was voted for and it's going to get some amendments, I think those amendments needs to be really specific where to get the budget from, because we cannot be 45 million under the whole once the money runs out. So there has to be something that people voted for, and then they have to present a solution.
Okay, so what's the right path for our legislature, Emily, on this? Because what Boyd and Lester just said is right. You know, people get to pass a law, but there are financial implications of those.
It's a very slippery slope because the people voted, and so we need to do what the people said. But we also need to fund the government, and I don't know, slippery slope.
Yeah,
slippery slope.
it's good. No, it's just going to be a fascinating discussion in terms of where that goes. A lot of this does tie back into the national things. What should come from the federal government? What should we buy into? A lot of times that's like a teaser rate on your credit card. You know, the money's there at the beginning, and then suddenly it's not, and you have big holes in the budget. So there are some real concerns there. But I think one of the things that's important for us to recognize that whether it's Medicaid or whether it's immigration, we have rule of law and we have discipline in terms of budgeting. But we also have compassion as a people. Yeah. And too often we make compassion and the rule of law as if they're binary choices. Those are compatible things, especially here in the state of Utah.
Especially here in the state of Utah. I think it's important to note, Governor Herbert released a video earlier this week asking the state of Utah to donate to the food bank. And he said, because that's what we do well. We are Utahns and we take care of each other. And at the end of the day, we need to take care of each other.
That's very good. Let's talk about one idea being kicked around in our legislature about how to address this issue that you all identified. Right? The people pass something, but what does the legislature do? One of these proposals is to make sure that no initiative goes into effect until 60 days after the next legislative session. That gives them a chance to do some things. Lester, does that fix the problem? How would people feel about that that you're talking to?
Probably someone else has a better opinion, but I think this is something that they fought for a long time. And then once the legislative session comes in, it gets changed, it gets amendment. Then one more year. So I guess you have to be patient. People need to see that there's going to be a result at the end of the day. But the time, it's long. And perhaps this is a time to learn from our mistakes, to learn from the different the changes that will come to it. And I guess this is how the roll-up works. This is how it works.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep in mind, too, that the ballot initiative process is important. It's important that the people have that. If a legislature or a governor gets too comfortable or they get comfortable playing kind of small ball politics rather than dealing with the important issues for the people, the ballot initiatives are important, but they're also very expensive. And so if you look at people saying, well, even if we go through this process and pass it, the legislature's got 60 days to mess it all up or change it, in their minds. That changes the dynamics a little bit. So I think there's going to be some pushback from outside groups.
Well, let's talk about one more, Emily. The Better Boundaries Initiative, Proposition 4, right? This independent redistricting commission. We don't see any bill on it this time, but we do have some members of the legislature, including Senator Weiler, saying, I'm going to...
You should be talking about it, is what he's saying.
Yeah, he is. In fact, now we should maybe even be challenging this in court. How does that play in your mind and the people you're talking to out there based on these conversations we just had about the will of the voters?
Well, I think Weiler is maybe seeing a problem before it happens, because a lot of people are saying we'll worry about it in a couple of years when we need to. But I think Weiler has a point that we need to address this. The people voted. If we don't like it, we need to figure something out sooner than later. But I think the bottom line is people have a say. Yeah, we are the lawmakers' bosses. And so while you might not like what we have to say, if you're not willing to do stuff, we should have an opportunity to say, hey, shape up. This is what we think you should be doing.
I think the ballot initiative is really, I think it's a learning opportunity for the people. Rep. Christensen said that they voted for something that was put together wrongly. So perhaps this is a message for the people to get together and get the right team players to structure a really, really well done initiative. Even though there might be people that say, you know what, when I vote for it, it's going to get changed. Why we even vote for it? What does it matter? But perhaps this is a learning chance for everyone to get the right people involved, to have like to have everyone's opinion. But at the end, place something really well. So when it comes to the legislature, it will, they won't be able to touch it because it's, I guess, pretty well done.
Right. Okay. I don't want to leave all these things we just had a chance to vote on. So Amendment C, I know some of us just call these things, which is really the legislature being able to call themselves into special session. And the reason I mention that is we may have a change, who knows, in our congressional delegation in the near future if the reports are right that Rob Bishop is potentially on the list to take over Secretary of the Interior. After Congressman Chaffetz left, there was a vacuum. How do we fill this role? Boyd, we may be in this position again with no clarity on this. First, how likely is it? What are you hearing about Congressman Bishop? And then how do we replace him if he does go?
So, one, I think he would do a fantastic job in Interior. I don't know that there's anybody, definitely no one in the Congress who has spent more time on natural resources and lands issues, I think, than Rob Bishop. I mean, he knows it inside and out, and I think he would be an extraordinary pick. If that were to happen, then, again, we're kind of back into the Congressman Chaffetz mode of, how do we fill this seat and who's in charge of that? Is it the governor? Is it the legislature? I hope that is one of those things they actually really deal with during the session this year.
Are you hearing any names for people who'd be interested in taking a spot up north?
I think Senator Weiler would probably be one of those.
Well, he's interested in a lot of things, so we'll see what he wants to do.
Very, very interesting. We have to talk about Ben McAdams, now in office, and interestingly, he's received the same committee's assignments that Representative Mia Love had. All right, so many people in the state, when they're talking about kind of the financial services industry in the state, they liked Mia Love being on that particular committee. How significant is it to the state that Ben McAdams, now a member of the majority party for the House, is taking that spot, Emily?
I think it's great. Utah's economy, we're very proud of our economic future, our outlook. A lot of people like to work in the financial industry, so I think to continue that footprint and have a little bit of a say there is great. Ben McAdams was very excited about this spot, made it very clear that this is something he wanted, and he was happy to continue to do that. Has a lot of experience with it when he was working here in the state of Utah. So I think anywhere that Utah can have a say on anything is not a bad idea. When it comes to the economic situation, I think that's a major win.
Yeah, I think it is a big win for the state, because not only did Representative Love have that role, but Jim Matheson also was on finance. So that's something that's clearly important to the state of Utah, and so that's a good thing for him to be there. He's going to have some very interesting waters to navigate, starting with the chairman, Maxine Waters, and then you also have new Representative Ocasio-Cortez is also on that. So there's some that are very much in the liberal left wing of that. Representative McAdams has been trying to chart more of a blue dog, Jim Matheson style Democrat down the middle. So he's going to have some interesting battles on that committee, and I think very early on, which will be very telling to see what kind of path he's going to chart there for that seat.
At this point, we'll see what McAdams always said in his campaign, that he balanced the budget within the Sully County wise. So he was able to balance the budget with council members from Republicans, and then working with the governor, with the Speaker of the House, Greg Hughes at the time. And then it's going to be a good challenge, as they said. It's going to be a good test for him to prove what he always promised in his campaign, to go and balance the budget. And now with the left side, with Ocasio-Cortez, is something that she's more liberal, and I think spending is more kind of like their mode. But hopefully this is something that he will showcase his experience.
And I think the biggest thing to watch with Representative McAdams is going to be the regulatory issues that come up, particularly around the banking industries, that are going to impact small Utah banks as well as all the other financial services we have in the state. That'll be a real test for him.
One other bill that's been put forward by our own delegation, Emily, is dealing with the Antiquities Act. So we're still talking about these national monuments in the state. I want to get into that for just a moment, but our own delegation has put out some
Well, except for McAdams. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. We'll talk about that too. But what's interesting is to require, before any of these national monuments could be declared in the state of Utah, you have to have the sort of consent and approval of the state. All right. How is that bill faring in Utah, and does that satisfy the people who are so concerned about the Antiquities Act?
I think it would. That's what they do in Alaska and Montana. So why not? Since so much of our land is being federally controlled, why not give the state a say? I do think it's interesting McAdams is not coming out in support of that, kind of stepping aside and being like, there's got to be a way to make things happy. From what I'm hearing, though, is do let the state have a say. If you're going to take our land, let let us have a viewpoint as well.
Boyd, you've been talking about these states' rights issue for a long time. Does that get to the heart of it? Does that give the state of Utah some protection, since so much of it is owned by the federal government, as Emily stated?
Yeah, and it doesn't. It goes back to what the governor said in his statement, that doing things at the state level is the best place to do it. And as Emily said, if it's good enough for Montana, Alaska, and Wyoming, and every other state in the union, it should be good enough for Utah.
Okay, it's good. As we get to the end of the program here, I just want to talk about this legislative session coming up and what you all are looking at as being some interesting issues that you are following. Okay, who has an interesting one? Emily, what are you following? Lester has one already.
Well, I have one. I would like to see going forward the bill that punishes the hate crimes. Hate crimes, that's one of the big issues that I would like to see going forward. It's going to be the fifth time it's been proposed in the legislative session, and hopefully this time doesn't get the pushback that it has faced before.
Yeah, so it's very interesting one, Boyd, and this one has not been successful in the past. Talk about the reasons why.
I think a lot of it, early on anyway, I think was more framing than anything. I think they're getting closer to something that everybody's a little more comfortable with. And with a lot of legislative pieces, it does just kind of take time to get everybody on board and kind of get the kinks out. So I think that one does have a good run. I think the other big thing to be watching is always in Utah is going to be education funding. And we are at this place where things are going well in the state. And so it's very important. In fact, the governor mentioned this morning that we can't rest on our laurels, that when we are in a good spot is the time we need to boldly move forward, boldly lead. Education funding in particular, we can't kick that can down the road anymore.
So Emily, how do they handle this at the legislature, the session when question number 1 didn't pass successfully to increase the amounts of money to education? How do they navigate that this year?
Very carefully. It'll be interesting to see how they figure out education. The other thing I'm anxious to see is the air quality. Big, huge topic for Governor Herbert. He wants to work on air quality. Everyone talks about it, especially this time of year. So I'm anxious to see where they figure out and how they're going to handle that one as well.
It's interesting, $100 million in the governor's
budget
for air quality. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. It's an important thing. It's something we need to talk about. We all breathe, so we need to make sure we figure that out.
Have to be the last word on that. Thank you so much for your really great insights. Appreciate it. Well, that's it for the Hinckley Report. Please join us again next week for another episode. Thank you and good night.